Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Medicine Buddha practice tonight. Um, Go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box if you're new. Um, if you have any questions, if we can just start putting questions in the chat box right now, then I can answer some of those questions. The past two nights, I know that the past 2 weeks, I've not had time to answer questions. So if you have any questions, particularly those questions that didn't, all the questions really that were asked last week, so you can put it in the ask a question box. Okay. I noticed as I was tuning in, who is it? I think it was Shelly in Tucson. Yeah, Shelly Dorsey. Um, Ironically, I will be in Tucson on Wednesday night, giving a talk for the University of Arizona in their, I think, behavioral science and something department on compassion. Um, this will be actually my first in-person public talk since quarantine began. Um, I mean, it's actually my first public talk in, well, yeah, about a year and 10 months, you know. Um, so yeah, if you're in Tucson, please come out and join me. It's not going to be on campus. I think it's going to be off campus. Um, yeah, so that's for all the Arizona folks near Tucson. Um, Awesome, Shelly, you'll be there. Yeah, please come up and introduce yourself. I actually don't know what the format will be. It's not going to be a long talk. I mean, no more than an hour and a half. But yeah, at the Fox Theater. Yeah, that sounds about right. Um, yeah, I wasn't planning on doing any public teaching this year. Um, but you know, I decided to give it a chance. It's very recent. This is something they just asked me to do within the past 4 months or so. So I think they just realized um, they could pull off an event with all the protocols. So we'll see. It's happening more and more um, in the world. Of course, it never stopped in some places. But in any case, just wanted to offer that. So as usual, if you're new, it's just a few moments, just waiting for people to get into the room, getting set up, and I'll introduce the practice, and then we'll practice for about 30 minutes or so. It's whenever um, I stop talking and get into the practice, really. And then we have questions. And so let me go to the first question. Okay. So I took the grief course with you and experienced a lot of intense grief afterwards that caused me physical problems. And any advice on how to be with the grief in a way that's more gentle for my body? I can say this. Well, um, I want to just offer this. I think that I want to kind of weave this into practice because grief, right? Um, so I think that part of that experience was grieving the end of the course. I think that was a real situation for several people. Um, and the way to move through that kind of really physical grieving I don't know if you returned back to the practices that we were working on, but ultimately it's about allowing the grief to be and just experiencing it and letting it go. When grief comes up for me, it's moving through the practice. It's moving through the snow practice, right? And just identifying and naming and just experiencing it, but experiencing it in a way that we're not fixating on it and grabbing onto it, right? And then working with the earth in the way that we've been doing, the way that I've been doing for years now with everyone, working with earth, releasing that energy, using the breath to move energy out of the body. But sometimes it's going to hurt, right? It's going to be a deeply intense physical as well as an emotional experience. As we've been talking about often, right, in this space, that, we're trying to recognize the emptiness of everything that arises. This is really the point of the wisdom deity tradition and Vajrayana tantric traditions, right? Particularly here with Medicine Buddha, wisdom deities are a skillful means to help us to understand that everything is empty and spacious, right? Even the most painful things, even the most intense trauma, right? And I've been really working with trauma this past month as well. And it's just letting it move out. Like, I've had some really painful like trauma release things happening, right? And it's just like you just let it go, like you let it move through. And release it, let it go. And I think sometimes for some of us, we're so self-identified with, I think sometimes the experience of discomfort, that we use discomfort and suffering to define us. It helps us to create a sense of self, and sometimes we don't know who we are if we let go of the pain. Now try to put the questions in the question box, because I just happened to look over. Also, go ahead and start putting prayers also into the chat box. So here's a question about the Bardo friend's mother and her friend's mother in her 70s. Just I don't really use the word suicide. I use the word, they took their life, right? Is there any considerations that might be different for that person in the Bardo? It's not so dualistic like that. If we have a situation like this where someone takes their life, it doesn't really mean that they have a difficult transition into the Bardo. It's really about the state of mind and the intention of that act. Why? Why are we doing that? Because the transition through the Bardo is based on our mental states, and not just in the moment, definitely in the moment, but also the mental states that have been strongest for us in life, right? And this is why practice and meditation is so important to do as much as we can in life, because we want to kind of move through and pacify really intense emotional states, right? Like anger, for instance, or lust, or greed, right? Desire. If these emotional states, these emotional experiences are really strong, then that begins to shape our experience, right? And the stronger the emotional state, the uncomfortable emotional states, the stronger those are, more than likely the more suffering we will, or more obstacles we will experience moving into the death process and afterwards. I like I like horror movies quite a bit. um, for kind of this reason that it really illustrates this piece of dharma that we don't really talk about, which is, I'm particularly like the horror movies about someone dying and they come back, as a vengeful spirit. Like one of my favorites was The Grudge, the Japanese version of The Grudge. Like that movie and movies like that really illustrate how dying in certain types of mental states creates the causes and conditions for a lot of suffering, and depending on our capacity and the strength of those emotions, we can actually, in a disembodied state, return back to this plane. We can touch into this plane, this reality, and create a lot of havoc for people, or rather the objects of our hate or our desire, and so forth. So that's all very real. That's a real thing that happens to people. So a lot of these horror movies, there's, let's just say you can meet someone who's had these experiences that we see in these horror movies, right? Again, we don't like to talk about it, but it's, it's quite, it's not uncommon, right? So anyway, we just don't know. Well, you can know if you have capacity to walk in the spirit realm and to check out people and to meet with people and to talk with people. You can know that way. But for most of us, we won't ever know that, how the impact of their actions will determine their movement through the bhanga and the spirit world, right? Karma isn't a binary situation as we like to think. Isn't like you do something wrong, you get punished. It's really not that. It's not fatalistic. It's actually very complex, very fluid, and karma is like everything in phenomenal reality doesn't exist, right? But within the relative, karma shapes everything, And as I always say, that like if you want to know how your karma is going, look at your life right now, right? If you want to know how your karma will be in the future, look at what you're doing now. Touching into the present, acknowledging what's happening in the moment, looking at your life tells you a lot about where you're going and where you've come from. So, I hope those have been helpful, and I'm gonna go. When is the grief too much and we need to go on a medication? Now that's something you have to determine for yourself. Like that's something that, I come, from this position of contemplative practice, right? And I am extremely open about other forms, other modalities to help us move through experiences of suffering, right? But everyone has to determine when the right time to seek other modalities is, right? If it's so intense, if the experience is so intense, and you're moving into a space of self-harm, then that's a really good sign that you should seek out help, right? To get medical attention and to seek out therapies, and medications. If you read anything, particularly of mine, Love and Rage or Radical Dharma, then Yeah, I have talked a lot about my relationship to, particularly with severe depression when I was in my 20s, early 20s, and the decisions that I was making around treatment. And for me, I decided not to seek, uh, medication for severe depression, um, and to kind of push through into practice. But really, what I did, I found a psychic healer, um, or she found me. Who knows? But my path led me to, energy work, energy healing, and into intense um, um, meditation practice. Um, so yeah, and so again, that's a decision that we have to make around, when we're working with grief. You I also really believe in forms of skillful self-medication, and that's again something that we all have to discern for ourselves. Like, what is that? What does that mean? And can we do it with a lot of awareness? Whatever that form of medication may be, it may, for a lot of people, it's marijuana, which in a couple states, is legal, so that's accessible for people. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's legal. I mean, it's like, you know, but it is accessible, right? It's accessible. Um, and that's just something you have to figure out for yourself, right? Um, I don't, um, what don't I do? Well, I'll say that, like, I see marijuana as plant medicine. I see it as a way that I ally with the consciousness and the goodwill of plant consciousness, um, and so marijuana has been very beneficial for me, particularly since this pandemic started, right? But again, you have to figure that out for yourself. Um, I know some of us have these 5 precepts, which is, these very basic vows that we take in Buddhism, which are the basis for entering into the monastic life, but also this is something that people just take in general. And the 5th precept is about substances, right? Using substances, and the Buddha taught that substances get in the way, you know. But when a substance doesn't get in the way of understanding, the nature of our minds, right, the essence of reality, then that's, that's not a drug, right? Um, we have, unfortunately, um, so much of what we would consider indigenous plant medicines have been labeled drugs and psychedelics. And that's a really colonized way of viewing it. It actually degrades indigenous wisdom and technologies. Um, and of course, here in America, that gets wrapped up with racial injustice, because a lot of, these kinds of medicines, were classified as drugs, and then um, legislated in such a way that it disproportionately impacts people of color. And so we maintain that kind of legal warfare, targeting communities of color. I think this is why marijuana, for instance, that's why I think so many of the laws are being relaxed, because we're beginning to understand the just the racism of these laws, and the impact. So anywho, yes, plant medicine, right? Yeah, it's many of you know, I drink medicine, or what we say use. I drink ayahuasca, or as we say, I go and sit with the grandmother, because that's one of the names for ayahuasca, is the grandmother. And ayahuasca, I'm in between ayahuasca retreats, so I'm heading back in a couple of weeks for 2 weeks of ceremonies down in Peru. And I go and drink with, just Western, mostly Western practitioners, but we're guided by indigenous shamans and people, if they're not indigenous, people who have really been with the medicine for years and years, yeah, and women who used to practice in Tibet, yeah, exactly, so you understand, like, herbal, indigenous, earth-based medicines, and also magic, that's part of magic, is, has been linked to oppressed, marginalized communities, right? And these medicines have to come back. So this relates to grief too, because I would say ayahuasca can just about move you through anything. The grandmother will take your hand and just move you through it. I'll just say, in my experience, I've seen things that were impossible happen, in my ceremonies, just moving through all kinds of, like, heartbreak and trauma and reconnecting and healing, all of that. I've seen other people move through just miracles, just miracles. And it's not magic, it's not miracle, it's just medicine, it's just strong medicine, And when I started drinking medicine, right, it just started, and working with other plant medicines, I worked with psilocybin, MDMA. I also use tobacco, and I grow my own tobacco. That's how serious this. I don't use tobacco just to smoke recreationally. I use it for ceremonies. I use it for smoke ceremonies, for offerings, for prayers. And one day I'll teach that in some capacity. Maybe when we start having in-person retreats. I may do it in England if you're able to join me in England in March. I'll be doing a residential weekend retreat that we're going to open registration in a couple of weeks. I may do it there. There'll be my first retreat, in-person retreat. So there, this is, it's kind of where I'm at with all of this. And all of these things help me to move through grief and pain and, and fear. There's so many modalities and practices of liberation that most of us have been raised to be really quite skeptical of and fearful of. And I'm always someone in my family and my friend group who's always off doing something that they would never do, And with a lot of my friends, most of my friends, and one of my spiritual communities I'm a member of, when I started drinking medicine, it was very critical, actually. Actually, someone told me that they felt like ayahuasca was just like the easy way out. What was the easy? It's like easy. And only someone who's never drank medicine would call ayahuasca easy. I don't put easy and ayahuasca in the same sentence ever. And so if you ever drink medicine, like, that this is not an easy way. It is a quick way, right? It is quick, but it's not easier. You may get it over quicker, right, moving through trauma, but You have to sit through that experience. You have to move through it, and the medicine just moves you through, ready or not. You're gonna do it. Particularly if you have the intention and aspiration. So I think that in the future, it's already happening. There's a huge shift back to indigenous wisdom, you know, and I'm trying to do everything I can to help with that. But me, like, growing my own tobacco, for instance, I have it out in the backyard here. I was just like, wow, like this is like a huge step. Not that I've never grown anything before, but like growing a plant for medicine. I grow Tulsi as well. And these are just medicines. Like it's allying with medicines. You can ally with any plant. Like, I have a friend who's allied with tea and has awakened the consciousness of tea. And so when you sit with them, you're having, this really profound, beautiful experience because he's awakened the consciousness of tea within his own experience, and he's able to offer tea an allyship with the tea itself, right? And invites you to also open to the tea. And this is all medicine. This is all medicine. This is right, within the tradition of Medicine Buddha. Medicine Buddha is about helping us to recognize the medicine in everything. Everything in the phenomenal world is medicine. And that's actually the view of Tantric Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism, which is what we're going to practice tonight. That's the view. Everything can be transformed into medicine with the appropriate practices and intention, right? Even trauma, right? Even trauma can be transformed into medicine. Because everything, on one hand, everything's trying to teach you how to get free. Even discomfort, even violence is teaching you how to get free. And the traditional Medicine Buddha is actually trying to get us to focus on that, right? And so beginning of next year, we're gonna, like I said, I'm gonna offer a series of, I guess, lectures or sessions on the tradition of Medicine Buddha, where we will actually, I'll actually move through my lineage's practice of Medicine Buddha and the commentaries, and the practice that I studied, when I was training to be a Lama and everything. And we'll spread these lectures out throughout the year. They'll be grouped together in maybe 4 sessions each throughout the year. I can't do everything together at once. It'll just be a lot. So we'll hopefully get that started in January or February. We're still looking at the schedule. Okay, so any other, there are more questions, but you know what, I am going to, let me just see if there's anything for you. Okay, I want to look at this. I notice as I go deeper into practice, I understand more the amount of work that is necessary to experience freedom. Yep. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed. I'm embarrassed to admit. I also feel tired of meditating. Oh yeah, of course. Like, I would be suspicious if you weren't tired of meditating, or at some point in your practice tired of meditating. I get tired of meditating. Sometimes, right? I relate to when your instruction to do the practice until I get sick of it. When you're sick of it, you just keep doing it, right? Yeah. And of course you get skillful. Like when I realize I'm just tired of practice, then if I get wrapped up in that aversion, then I'm no longer practicing. So when you're practicing and going to the edge of getting tired of practicing, you recognize that fatigue as the arising of a thought. It's just a thought, right? And that thought is becoming a narrative. for you, and you're interacting with that narrative, and building it. It's like throwing wood into a fire, right? So we have to first and foremost recognize that like my aversion is a thought that I'm having. Secondly, if I can do that, then I can say, okay, I realize that this is a thought, this is just a narrative, and I want to make sure that I take care of myself. So you can do something to refresh the practice, right? When I was training, particularly in Kagyu, lineage, Tibetan Buddhism, it's like you don't really necessarily sit for these long periods, right? You're encouraged to take breaks, to refresh, right? Because it's not about an endurance. It's not about, this isn't about a marathon, right? It's more of a sprint. Like we're sprinting these short distances, and learning a lot from that sprint, and then you break, right? And you come back to the sprint instead of just running, these long, or just sitting these long periods, because, you can just zone out, you can go do something else. You zone out because your body needs to be taken care of, right? So all that has to be handled skillfully. This is about a skillful means. So how do we navigate the overwhelm of this work? It's so many ways to do that. I use gratitude practice often. That helps me to cut through the frustration, right? I step back and I say, okay, like, what's beneficial that's happening around me, right? What's really going on, like all the kindness and the labor that I experience. We're gonna do some gratitude practice again tonight, as we've done often in the past, but like, yes, I practice and I may not see results, but like there's still really wonderful things happening. And the most wonderful thing is that I have a human life. I have this precious human life, where I'm interested in spiritual practice, Now, as I've gotten old, I've gotten really quite liberal about spiritual practice, because early in my practice, we're taught that you have to be a Buddhist, right? You have to take refuge in the three jewels for this life to be precious. But at this point, I think that, first of all, I understand that there are multiple ways to get to the end of the path. And Buddhism is just one way. Buddhism actually doesn't really exist, but nothing exists, right? We get so fixated on Buddhism, and like Buddhism is just this collection of symbols and signs and codes that are attempting to help us unlock the truth of reality. But Buddhism doesn't have the market cornered on liberation. Like Vedic traditions were around thousands of years before the Buddha came around. Buddha actually just, he just modified and reinterpreted the teachings of the culture that he was born into, and just kind of did some slight revisions, like self and no self, right? A couple of tweaks like that, but there's so many ways to get free. In plant medicine, the tradition of ayahuasca is another path of getting free, getting enlightened. So at this point, I just feel like, like if you're on a liberatory path, when I started meeting Christian mystics, and I was like, ooh, they're doing something I grew up Christian. They're doing something that no one ever talked about, like deep contemplative practice, right? Like the deeper and higher your realization goes, the more you realize that when you get really rigid around the right path to freedom is when you're no longer getting free. And I think a lot of Buddhists are too rigid and fundamental for their own good. to understand that the world is full of doorways to liberation, including plant medicines, including indigenous wisdom, including other paths, other traditions. That narrow-minded, I just can't, like there's always these movements in contemporary Buddhism about relying on doctrine and scholarship. You rely on doctrine and scholarship because you actually don't have any experience from practice, right? So you have to use a book. Like you have to use text to understand what's going on because you actually don't have a deep enough practice that actually begins to teach you. And this is the spirit of again, Tantric Buddhism, Vajrayana, which is where I'm coming from, right? The deeper the practice, the more you begin to realize that the whole of the phenomenal world, all phenomenal world is teaching you, is teaching you how to get free. So I can read a book, I can read a book on Mahamudra, which is the system of meditation and philosophy, in Vajrayana Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. And so I can read about Mahamudra, the levels of consciousness and how to get, and that's fine and well, but when you sit and you do your practice, when I sit and do my practice, I have these direct experiences. This is why I talk about the bardo and the spirit world in the way that I do, because I have the capacity to touch into the spirit world. That's one of my abilities. I don't necessarily call myself a medium, but I can shift consciousness into touching into the unseen world, and so I just see things. And so when I read these traditional teachings about the bardo, I say, well, that's not what I've seen or experienced, and that's certainly not what I've been told by beings who are navigating the world, the spirit world. But anyhow, I want to get started with practice because I have talked too long. So with plant medicine, if you're thinking about plant medicine, ayahuasca, lorina, then you are being called into ceremony with plant medicine. So we develop an intention to ally with the medicine, and that intention will start creating the causes and conditions for us to meet a skillful facilitator of the medicine. And it's not just, there are many indigenous wisdom plant medicines. From my experience, I consider ayahuasca, the grandmother, to be the most powerful of all the medicines, but there are so many medicines that do different things. But ayahuasca is the medicine that calls us the strongly, I think, because there's a consciousness, there's a cosmic enlightened consciousness with the medicine, if you trust it. If you don't trust the medicine, it's just going to be nothing but suffering, and you won't. And if you are uncomfortable, you'll never really understand the healing potential of the medicine. I see people pushing against the medicine, and that just creates a tension in the practice that's really hard to move through over time. So there's a surrender, there's a willingness. Again, I just think that this all lines up with devotional practice and deity practice. It's about surrendering to the healing. And the healing doesn't necessarily feel good. It's not, for those of you who work with trauma release doesn't feel good. It feels good after maybe the fact, after you've integrated the experience, but in the moment, releasing trauma, moving through this stuff, it's not fun, it's not great, but for me, I have to do it. I choose to do it because I don't want to be free. I need to be free. And that's where some of you really need to work on that aspiration. Do you want to be free, or do you need to be free? Because wanting something isn't going to get you to the end. Talking about the previous question, like you get so tired. Did I actually finish answering the last question? I know we need to get into practice, but do you want to get free, or do you need to get free? That's the question. And you have to determine that. Again, wanting something is not going to get you to the end of this path, of this labor. I'm talking about this in my next book that I'm working on right now. Like, just wanting something isn't going to get you free. I'm actually exploring freedom and liberation through an abolitionist lens in my next book. So I'm using abolition to really talk about like the work of freedom and aligning absolute freedom with social freedom, which we would call radical dharma. But like you need to get free. That's where you have to train at like the need, and you develop the need to get free when you have finally let go and admitted that this world, samsara, which in my next work I call the carceral states, when you realize what this really is, that this world will never be a utopia, that anything predicated on delusion will never transform into enlightenment. Therefore, what we understand is that liberation is about our effort in transforming our relationship to this delusion, not transforming the delusion of samsara itself. And that's where we're very confused about that right now. We have to work on our relationship. We have to develop compassion and wisdom, which is what I'm going to talk about Wednesday night. For those of you who can come, I know Shelly's going to come. I'm going to talk about that Wednesday. It's like you have to transform your relationship. You have to understand what this really is, right? And the compassion, so the wisdom helps us to see what's happening. The compassion helps us to be in relationship with all the other beings who are trapped in this, because the wisdom itself, you may see the nature of things, but you're gonna get really apathetic about it, and basically it'll be like, well, I see what's happening, and I'm gonna save myself. I'm gonna do something different. That's technically the path of the solitary realizer in early Buddhism. The solitary realizer who's just like, I'm getting the hell out of here. But when we move through the vehicles into Mahayana, right? Mahayana means that I'm going to see what's happening, and I'm going to care about people who are trapped in this, and we're going to get out of this together. And therefore you're expressing bodhicitta, which is this wish to get free for yourself and others, and you're also embodying the bodhisattva, which is all of what my book is about. Samsara is just being samsara. So here's the other contradiction. You know what samsara is about, but you don't give up on samsara. You talk about the work. This is what we're doing as we're moving towards liberation is really having to work through these contradictions. And there's a tension within the contradictions that we have to start using to propel ourselves towards liberation. Now, that's a whole other thing that I will not be able to get into tonight. We just don't have the time. But the idea is that all these contradictions arise. Of course, the ultimate contradiction is form and emptiness. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. That's the grand contradiction. the grand tension from the perspective of Buddhism. And I think from all paths oriented towards liberation. It's like you have to reconcile that tension by just admitting it that like I am moving through this world and this world is not real, right? But I have to take it seriously, right? That's the grand contradiction, right? Am I really trapped? No. Am I bound in this world? No. But I believe I am. And therefore, I have to work through this belief and the fixation on this belief. Right? That there's somewhere to go. There's nowhere to go. Nothing's happening. This is, it's the matrix, right? And I'm not really sitting here. You're not really listening to this. And there's no such thing as sound. I'm worried about time. There's no such thing as time. But this is all still arising as phenomena, right? And you have to bring these two truths together. It's real and it's not real. And you really can't think about it. There's no way, these great philosophers did incredible work, right? I'm thinking, around Tibetan scholarship, did incredible work with helping us understand, what this bind, this tension is. But ultimately, this is an experience that we have to embody, and that experience will disrupt us because there's no way to stay tuned into the matrix when you're really bringing these opposite, what seems to be opposite truths together. It's going to really disrupt. It's going to jolt you. And you will look differently. Like you will show up very differently. Like we have all these stories of these intense spiritual people, gurus and teachers and swamis and everything. And that's the consequence. One of the consequences, right? Once you understand what's really happening, you don't live in this kind of assimilationist lifestyle like the majority of the people in the world, the majority of beings, not just people, animals, spirits, and everyone. You get jolted, right? And your activity becomes eccentric. It can become eccentric and outlandish, and because you're not bound by the same rules anymore that the rest of us are. Okay, so let's do practice. Let's get into our practice. So we're going to continue doing, this prosperity work within the lens of Medicine Buddha. I want to go back to our needs again. Like our needs. And I'm going to come back. I'm going to make sure I come back to the questions before we go. So we're going to practice for about 30 minutes or so and leave about 10 minutes for questions. Okay? But we're going to come back to our needs. So I know this is like a lot of people's first time here, and so I'm trying to, just explain everything as much as possible. But just to catch you up, we've been practicing about understanding what we need the past few sessions. So again, I encourage you to think about what you need right now. The last time people shared about needing rest, needing support, needing, medical care, right? needing more love, needing compassion. So what do you need right now? If you don't know what you need, this is okay. And so if you don't know what you need, then so you ask a question, may I get what I need? Or may what I need be presented to me? Because you're always getting what you need. You're not getting everything of what you need, but you're getting air and oxygen. You're getting some food. You're getting a little bit of rest, right? These are things that we need that we're already getting. But we're trying to become conscious of other things that we're not getting in our life that we need in order to be well, safe, happy. Mm-hmm. So again, if you don't know what that need is, you just say, may I get what I need? Right? And that's my basic prayer as well. May I receive what I need in order to be well and to continue the work. And I want you to make that part of your daily practice and affirmation. When you wake up, you're saying, may I get what I need today. Or may the causes and conditions come together that I'm able to get what I need. So let's begin right there. Either reflecting on what you know you need or making that aspiration. May the causes and conditions come together so I get what I need. So let's continue, and I invite you to allow your body to come into a position that's appropriate for practice. So no one can see you. So, just find yourself in a position that feels appropriate for you. I don't use the word comfortable because comfort is so subjective. But a position that feels okay for you. When I say okay, I mean coming into a position where you're not so overwhelmingly distracted by sensations of discomfort. When you're ready, shifting your attention to the weight of your body, particularly the weight of your body making contact with the seats, or maybe you're lying on something, feeling that sensation. Now shifting your attention down into the earth. So we're acknowledging the earth here. And the acknowledgement or the connecting to the earth is just a thought, right? It's just, I'm thinking about the earth is under me. And then beyond that, you can start connecting to the energy of the earth. Like, what does the earth feel like to you? And some of the words, experiences could be the earth feels foundational, the earth feels solid, the earth feels grounding, the earth feels rich. But what is that experience for you though? Again, this is a time and a space where we can reflect briefly on the history of the land, of the, of the indigenous history of the land, the ancestral history of the land. And the land, the earth, we're allowing to be conscious, awakened. Right? There's a deep consciousness to the earth. Actually, there's a deep consciousness to all phenomena, right? But because of the ways in which we have been indoctrinated into, colonizer settler mentality, we find ourselves disconnected from the consciousness of the phenomenal world, particularly of the natural world, of the elements, right? Of the air and the wind and the water and the earth and plants. And again, this may be all new to you. So even in this practice, just telling yourself, oh, the world is alive, the earth is alive, everything is conscious, it's just a really good first step forward. And can you trust the seat? And can you trust the earth under you to hold you? Now, this is a really fundamental thing because many of us don't trust anything or anyone. We don't even trust ourselves. But in this moment, can you kind of work a little bit on what it means to trust the seat to hold me in this practice, to trust that the earth is always holding me? And when you maybe connect to maybe a little bit of that trust, and you'll know, because when you start trusting foundation, you'll start opening. Your body starts opening, your heart center starts opening. There's an experience of spaciousness that begins to happen, to start in both your body and mind. So I can call this relaxing, right? You begin to relax, but again, relaxing, that term is very loaded for all of us. But if that's how you understand it, of course, think about it as relaxing. But when you start connecting, you feel opening and letting go. And for those of you who are really kind of struggling, working with a lot of heavy grief, for instance, when you feel this opening, imagine releasing that energy of grief into the earth. And letting go. Right? And that releasing is also going to open up more of that emotional energy that you're moving through. Because we're not really working with and experiencing the totality of that emotional energy. We're actually, part of our consciousness is holding some of it back. Right? And so when you start releasing like this, then these deeper experiences of mind begin to slowly release this energy, these experiences. And I can only do the work of releasing if I am connected to an experience of refuge like the earth. So can you really let go and just let yourself be held? Ultimately by the earth, but also by the seat. Just, staying here for just a few more moments, working with this. And so let's transition now into our gratitude practice. Right? And gratitude is an experience of just deep appreciation. It's the recognition that I am dependent on the kindness and labor of countless beings, both seen and unseen. And all of this is the reason I'm alive. I'm sitting here and being here. All the labor, all the kindness that's invested in me without my consent, right? Without me knowing it, most of it has contributed to whatever sense of happiness and blessings I experience. So beginning to reflect on that, how we rely on others. Some people help us and they don't even like us, but they still help us. Or we can get into this by reflecting on something that we're just deeply grateful for. By allowing this energy to awaken first in the heart center. If you want, you can bring just a hand up to the heart center. Imagine breathing in and out of the heart center. And breathing in as you're moving through this reflection. Allowing gratitude to awaken. Again, allowing the opening and the releasing. And allowing that energy to begin to fill up your mind and your body. This energy of gratitude, appreciation. This energy of surrender and opening. And let this opening, this space that may be arising for some of us, let that hold experiences of discomfort right now. Sometimes in my practice, I imagine that this energy of gratitude becomes like this huge ocean. This huge, beautiful, clear, pristine ocean. And I'm just allowing all my suffering, my discomfort, just kind of float on that sea. So this energy of gratitude just holds everything that I'm struggling with. I don't have to do anything except experience gratitude. Just a few more moments working with just allowing your discomfort to float on the sea of gratitude. If you want to go just a little further with this part of the practice, I want you to imagine, or I invite you to imagine, that this energy of gratitude as water, right, as this ocean begins to flow through you. As this energy flows through you, is flowing out of you into the earth. And as this water of gratitude flows out of your body into the earth, you begin to water the earth. You begin to nourish the earth under you. And this is one of the ways we can take care of the land, is by connecting through gratitude. So this energy of gratitude just begins to wash through you into the earth. And if you want to go even further with this, imagine that all the stuff that we're struggling with, everything that we brought into this session, right? The worry, the fear, the anxiety, you can imagine that this water of gratitude is dissolving that in our bodies and our minds, and it's all just being washed out, purified into the earth as an offering of nourishment to the earth. And now you can stay with this visualization, and alternatively, you can move in a different direction where you begin to imagine that this water of gratitude is being offered out to nourish all those whom we've offered in prayer tonight. Nourishing those that are connected to us who need this water, and then extending out to other beings who need it as well. Knowing that the source of this healing energy in the form of gratitude is being expressed from our own experiences, from our own bodies. And we'll go into briefly Medicine Buddhist mantra Teata Bakense, Maha Bakense, Rasa Sumungate Soha. And you can just sit and listen to the mantra and continue working through these visualizations. But the mantra helps to deeply energize the work, the healing work that we're doing for ourselves and for others. So this galvanizes, this activates the practice in a really powerful, profound way, because it connects us to the consciousness of Medicine Buddha, whose consciousness is about medicine and healing and liberation. Okay? So again, Teya Taum Bakenze, Maha Bakense, Rasa Sumungate Soha. Okay? O Teya Taum Bakenze, Ma Bakenze, Rasa Sumungate Soha. Teya Taum Bakenze, Ma Bakenze, Rasa Sumungate Soha. Teya Taum Bakenze, Ma Bakenze, Rasa Sumungate Soha. Teya Taum Bakenze, Ma Bakenze, And so for the last few minutes of practice, I want you to turn your attention back to your needs or the aspirations to get what you need. And imagine that these waters of gratitude begin to water that expression of that need and the aspiration. So the water of this gratitude begins to deeply saturate, right? This desire to get what you need. It's like watering a plant that, is dry. So you're watering the energy, the potential of this need. And that creates the conditions, the causes and conditions for this need to be met sooner than later. Okay? So just for a few moments, imagine just deeply watering this need. You can imagine that this need is like a plant that needs to be watered, and you're just watering the plant. If you need a visualization, but you can just imagine like deeply watering this need, and this need as it's being watered becomes alive, it becomes vibrant. You begin to feel like you have to really desire this need for it to happen. We won't get the things that we really need, that we consciously need, until we actually start working towards it and taking care of that aspiration to get the need. Okay? So we begin again just for a few moments. O te a taum begenze, ma begenze, laza sumunga te soa. Te a taum begenze, ma begenze, laza sumunga te soa. Te a taum begenze, ma begenze, laza sumunga te soa. Te a taum begenze, ma begenze, laza sumunga te soa. Te a taum begenze, tesoha. Teata begenze begenze maha begenze rasa sumunga tesoha. Teata begenze begenze maha begenze rasa sumunga tesoha. And as we begin to transition out of the practice, imagining that this last flow of this ocean of gratitude just cleanses everything and everyone that you've been offering to. And feeling the earth alive and conscious, feeling the space around you alive and active. And just holding space for everything. Just letting everything be is the first step of transforming our relationship to the phenomenal world, just letting it be. Without first letting it be, we'll never be able to understand what it is. Now shifting your attention back to the seat, noticing the weight of the body making contact with the seat. And just grounding your attention with the weight of the body, right? Just coming back. The weight of the body is being used to bring us back to this moment, to bring us out of the abstract or the fluidity back into something that feels solid and grounding. So letting go of all the visualizations and the thinking and the narratives, letting all that dissolve into the nature of your mind, like a fog dissolving into the air when it starts getting warm. Just that disappearance, that dissolving. Just let the fog of thinking and imagining just dissolve into the experience of mind. So coming back into the space, doing some simple movements, right? Beginning to awaken the body, and we'll transition into our Shantideva's prayer, which is from the Bodhisattva's Guide to a Way of Life. I have something to show you before we end, but I'm going to get to the questions as briefly as possible. So we're going to recite this prayer from Shantideva, who's a great Indian master, very realized, was a monk and scholar and enlightened. And this is from his, I would say, seminal work, The Bodhisattva's Way of Life, like a guide to a Bodhisattva's way of life. So we'll begin to recite this 3 times. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed, just like space. And the great elements such as earth may always support the life of all the boundless creatures. And, until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring a further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed, just like space. And the great elements such as earth may always support the life of all the boundless creatures. And, until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. And finally, may I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed, just like space and the great elements such as earth. May I always support the life of all the boundless creatures, and, until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. So, first, thank you for your practice. I know we're right at time. I'm just going to see what I can do to get through the questions. So this question is my first time in a Buddhist space. Can you suggest how to start this journey, how to learn more as a practicing Christian my whole life? That beginning has always been rooted in the Bible, but that start with Buddhism feels different. Yeah, I would, one of the first books I started with when I was coming out of Christianity early in my practice was Pema Chodron, Start Where You Are. And if someone wants to just type that into the chat, that would be great. So Pema Chodron, Start Where You're At, is really a great introduction to Buddhism, and that will begin to open up different experiences. And I would also suggest, since so much is still online, that just exploring different kinds of practices in different groups, like going on YouTube. Of course, this can be kind of dangerous because not everything on YouTube is like great. But just like exploring different kinds of meditations. When I began, I just when most people begin, I think you should really just explore whatever feels interesting. And if this feels interesting, just keep coming to this, Pema Chodron, of course, is coming from Tibetan tradition, my tradition. But you can read, all kinds, Tara, I can't believe I forget Tara's last name. Sharon Salzberg, for instance, Jack Kornfield and Theravada, and for Zen practitioners, and teachers, all kinds. So it's just like you just explore, and whatever you read or hear, and it really sparks something. Then like stick with it and explore it more. Tara Brach, yeah. Okay, I think that was the only question. And lastly, I would say, just Lorena, just some comments here. I just think that my thing in life when it concerns practice has often been going to the source of the practice. And I've been very fortunate to be able to do that. So when I say talking about going to the source, I go to the lineage, the people, the communities that have held the practice traditionally. You know, be it Tibetan Buddhism, be it plant medicine in South, in South America. Like go to the people who hold it, and alternatively, the next best thing is to go to someone who has mastered whatever you're trying to learn. To find a real living master. And I've been very fortunate. Of course, it's been quite complex, but I've been very fortunate to study with realized masters. Which has resulted in the kind of practice at this point that has been deeply generative, and opening and spacious, for me. So you go to the real deal, right? You go to the real deal. There's a lot of people, teachers, and this is for our new people too. There's a lot of teachers who aren't really, who shouldn't really be teaching. I would just say that there's some teachers who really shouldn't be teaching, not because they've done something wrong. It's just they just aren't. They haven't metabolized the practice deeply enough yet. So when there are teachers who are just talking scholarship and doctrine and not talking about the wisdom, the clarity, there's a place for that. It's called academia, right? And there's also a place for that in practice, but the analytical, conceptual study and scholarship, that is extremely important, but that shouldn't dominate your practice. Your practice should be dominated by practice, by whatever it is: sitting, chanting, kirtan, asana, pranayama, whatever it is, whatever you're doing, that should dominate the practice. So my root teacher taught that if you split your practice into 3 parts, 2/3 of your practice should be practice, meditation, whatever that practice is, and just a third of it should be study. Should be the reading and the thinking and the researching and the reading of the books. When I began practicing, it was reversed. I spent most of my time actually reading and studying because I needed to, of course you do something different. You just want to inhale everything. So I inhaled all these books, and then I wasn't that really interested. I practiced, but it wasn't exciting. It wasn't interesting. It was interesting reading books and going to Dharma talks. I loved, early on going to intensive retreats and going to Dharma talks. I loved it. I still like it. I still love Dharma talks, but now what I love is practice. I love sitting. I love my asana practice. I love kirtan. I love chanting. I love just mixing my mind with emptiness. I love practicing with deities. That's why that's my practice. I love that. And I am someone who is very intellectual too, which I would never say that about myself, but you can't keep, at least for me, I can't keep pushing it away, right? I am an intellectual. I write books. I do, all this really intense thinking. But I am also first and foremost a practitioner and a student of practice. So no matter how much I think and read and write, most of my practice is sitting, it's asana. You know, I'm still actually in my asana clothes now, my yoga clothes. You know, all these practices are important for me. You know, but yeah. So at the beginning, I think it's okay for our practice to be mostly reading and intellectual. Then it has to shift into putting all of the stuff that we've learned into practice, because that's where the real wisdom and knowledge and clarity emerges. You know, you're not going to get free reading a book. You're going to get free becoming aware of your mind and body. That's how you get free. This is a lineage of awareness. You know, if for those of you coming out of Christian practice, which is most of us, you know, particularly if you grew up in this country, right, in America, like you can still talk about God and think about God. I do, right? But my understanding of God isn't the same understanding of God that I was raised with. You know, so God is still in my practice. The saints are still in my practice. Angels and Jesus and Mary Magdalene and Mary Mother of Christ, and you know, these are still active energies in my practice. I still believe in God, but I understand God just to be an expression of the essence of reality. You know. I love everything everyone's sharing. This is all great Dharma seed and the books, and no wisdom can be found from intellect alone. Intellect can only point you towards wisdom, correct. And some of the most dangerous people are people who are just wise but have no compassion. And that's where the lack of practice leads you. It's like you can't form real embodied experiences of compassion without practice. Right? You can maybe use the intellect to get into certain forms of wisdom, but you can't get to the compassion without practice. And for those of us who don't, who are just really intellectual, who think we know everything, we're the most dangerous people. Like we realize, it's like some of the people who create the most harm for us in the world, went through universities like Harvard and Oxford, right? Very smart people, but they're using their intellect to create a lot of harm for us in the world. So, enough of that. I hope this has been helpful for everyone. I hope people come back. And we'll see you. What's happening this week? What's the date? The 25th. So I'm doing a practice on Sunday morning, which I think everyone's time zone can be accommodated. I think it's at 10 or 11. You can check it on the Bhumi Sparsha website. We're going to be doing mother practice. And linking that, and I guess it's Halloween, so linking that to ancestors and so forth. So that's Sunday morning. Check the Bhumi Sparsha website, and if I don't see you Sunday, I'll see you back here on Monday, which is November 1st, so this is a really intense weekend coming up for ceremony, for those of you who are into the Day of the Dead, and All Saints, Samhain. It's about light, it's about harvest, it's about ancestors, it's about the unseen world. So, I'll try to work on that, incorporate all of this into our practice on Sunday and Monday. Okay? All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Please have a good rest of your day or evening or afternoon, depending on where you're all at. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you soon.